Hey house group, how's it going? Pastor Ty here, and I've got your house group announcement. That's right, singular. We have one announcement for the night, but it's an important one, and that's why I've got my little note card of information. So let's jump into it. Our one announcement for the night is baptism. We have baptism services coming up at the end of March. Sunday, March 27th will be our baptism service. So if you've not been baptized before, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, baptism could be my next step, this is actually a great time to check it out. We'll have a baptism class happening on Sunday, March 13th during the 11:10 service here at the Aurora campus. Now, this is a baptism class, so if you want more information about what baptism is, you can come to this class and ask questions, learn about what it is. This does not mean that you are signing up to be baptized if you come to this class. But if you know that baptism is your next step, you want to jump in and you do want to be baptized, you do need to attend this class. So go to ccclife.org/baptism and sign up for the class. Now, if you can't go to this class, but you still want to be baptized, send me an email at tyhall@ccclife.org and we'll figure out a time where a baptism class will work for you. Now, if you just want to ask questions about what baptism is, you can also send those questions to me, but you can also ask your house group leaders about their baptism story. What was it like for them, and what is baptism? And I'm sure they'd be happy to have a conversation with you about what it means to be baptized. All right, y'all, that's really all I got. So I hope you have a wonderful night. I love you guys. I'll see you later.
Uncomfortable, stressful, overwhelming, chaotic. What if life wasn't meant to be like this? What if the chaos that often marks our lives was never the plan? What if there was a different way? That same language can often describe our spiritual journey too. Disjointed, frustrated, disconnected. For many of us, we surrendered our lives to Christ on the promise of a full life, but all we feel is a life full of stress, mess, and discontentment. That can't be right. That can't be all there is. For centuries, the people of God have been called apart from the world, to live differently, to live distinct from the world around them. What if it was in that distinction that the rhythm of our life was found? What if it was in the small, consistent practices of Jesus that we experienced the life he promised? What if we believed him when he called us out of death into life and showed us the way to live? What if we believed him when he said, "This is the way"?
Question for you. Who here has seen The Mandalorian? Full disclosure, I am not a big Star Wars guy, but in the heart of the pandemic when this series came out, I was bored enough, or maybe interested enough, to at least give it a shot, and I really enjoyed it, actually. It was a good series. The series is pretty cool between the space travel and the action scenes and a tiny little green alien. There is a lot to kind of keep you interested. The Mandalorians themselves, as a group of people, were pretty cool. They were like feared throughout the galaxy. They were pretty hardcore, pretty intense people, but they were also really committed to a particular way of living their life. And this series on, I think it's on Disney Plus, right, kind of captured this reality really well, and some of the interactions that the Mandalorian, the main character, would have with other people in his order of the Mandalore, right? So they might say things like, we're committed to never removing our helmets, or certain types of metal used to create armor or weapons, or different things they would do to honor the legacy of the Mandalorian lifestyle. And whenever they would have these interactions, they'd call something out like this, they would say, "This is the way." And that statement in of itself will really just capture this sort of deep appreciation for their way of life and their commitment, their devotion to it. As Christ followers, we are also invited to a distinct way of living that sets us apart from the rest of the world. And this lifestyle isn't meant to be seen as a source of pride, something that we sort of like sit on our self-righteous pedestals and look down at the world around us, but it is meant to set us apart, have us live distinctly from the rest of the world. And that distinction might come in the way that we see the world around us. In just a couple weeks, we're going to be in a new series where we're going to look at things like race, gender and sexuality, suffering, and social media. And we're going to ask the question, as Christ followers, how should our engagement with these things, how should the way that we view and think about these things be different from the rest of the world around us? So there might be some of those larger categories of distinction in the Christian life. But there's also some smaller practices that should be distinct, that should be evidenced in our life, maybe daily or weekly or monthly, things we should be doing with some sense of consistency that set our lives apart from the life of the people that might be around us. Things like Bible reading or prayer, fasting, and Sabbath are just a few of these kind of rhythms that as Christ followers we should be committed to on a consistent basis. Now, I'm sure that many of you guys that are listening across all of our house group locations, I'm sure many of you guys are used to some of this language, right? Maybe you're familiar with prayer or you know about Bible reading or fasting or Sabbath. Some of those things might be familiar to you, right? Some of you guys might see them as annoyances. These are things I just kind of have to do because my parents or my pastor is telling me to. You might have even heard these things kind of included in a larger category, something called spiritual disciplines. And I think that language is really helpful in the same way that you have disciplines in the rest of your life. You have spiritual disciplines, but in some of my conversation with you guys and your generation, there's a bit of an apprehension around this idea of discipline, right? For most of us, that word makes us uncomfortable. We want to avoid disciplines if we can, and so that can feel a little bit limiting, right? Feel restrictive and really only kind of continue to perpetuate this idea of Christianity being restrictive or all about limitations or pulling away fun. So that discipline language can kind of be like, it just be difficult, leave a bad taste in our mouth, and be something we don't want to kind of embrace as it relates to a distinct way of living. When it comes to things like prayer and Bible reading and fasting and Sabbath, I think personally the idea of disciplines is a good thing, but there is another way to categorize them. We call them spiritual rhythms. You've heard me use that phrase even just a couple minutes ago at the top of this message, this idea of rhythms. Now, the idea of rhythm is something I think we can all appreciate and we can see is valuable, even if you're not a musician. The idea of rhythm, definition from the dictionary says this: it is a strong, regular, repeated pattern of movement or sound. So in music, a rhythm sets the tempo for a song. It keeps all the musicians playing together. In fact, did you know that our creative arts teams at Christ Community Church, I hope they don't mind me saying this, they actually play with something called a click track in their ears. So maybe you've seen people on stage at your campus, or if you're watching online, you see it there too, and they have earpieces in, right? Their own little headphones. And in that, they're hearing a constant click, 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 click. That beat kind of continues through the entirety of a song, and it's different based on if the song is fast or it's slow. But the whole idea of that click is to keep all of the instruments playing at the same pace, at the same rhythm. If they didn't have that, in fact, I remember back in the day when I was actually on the worship team, we didn't have that, and one of the things that we ran into with a level of consistency that's probably a little embarrassing was different instruments playing at different speeds, different paces. And so without proper rhythm, something that could be really beautiful just feels out of tune, right? If your guitar is playing at one speed and your drums are hitting at a different speed, it sounds kind of funny, right? So this music that's supposed to be beautiful can just feel a little bit off. And the same is true of our lives. When we lack the proper rhythms, life can feel out of tune. Think about it. You have physical rhythms that you engage in every day, right? You sleep, you eat, you might go to the gym, or you brush your teeth, right? When we miss those things, life feels off, your teeth feel gritty, right? It's kind of gross. You have mental rhythms like school that's divided up into subjects or hours of the day. And you have homework. You have your own reading you have to do, right? There's these mental rhythms that you engage in and day out. When we miss those things, it can feel a bit overwhelming. Think about it, right? For a moment, you might like being not at school, but if you've ever taken a long vacation and you've missed a bunch of work and you come back and there's this mountain of stuff that you've got to do, that can feel really hard. Or if you just decide right now, I'm done, I'm dropping out of school, and I'm never going back, you're going to miss out on some things that are going to be really valuable for you to learn that will help you later on down the road. So these mental rhythms become a necessary part of your life. We have emotional rhythms too, right? We see friends, we check social media, we have alone time, or we do things like hobbies that bring us joy. And when we miss those rhythms, life feels absent, right? It feels empty in some spaces. When we neglect these necessary rhythms, life can just feel out of tune. Now, things like spiritual disciplines or spiritual rhythms, they invite us to find peace in God's presence and His design for our life. This is the way. One of the rhythms that can do this for us is the rhythm of fasting. This might be one of the rhythms that you're less familiar with, and that's okay. We're here to learn and we're here to grow together. One Bible teacher that I was reading defines fasting this way. They say it's a temporary renunciation of something that in and of itself is good, like food, in order to intensify our expression of need for something greater, namely God and his work in our lives. So what this person's getting at is to say, when we fast, we say no to something good to remind us of our need for the greatest thing, and that's God. Admittedly, the idea of fasting is not something that we get a whole lot of explanation about in Scripture. And that's the case for actually a few of the rhythms that we're going to look at over the next few weeks. That doesn't mean that these things are not biblical or that they aren't in the Bible. It just means that instead of explanation about them, we get a lot of examples of people living them out, if that makes sense, people practicing these things. Here's a really quick run through, right? Moses fasted, David fasted, Daniel fasted, Esther fasted, Nehemiah fasted, the people of Nineveh fasted, Jesus fasted, disciples of John the Baptist fasted, the elders in the early church fasted, and Paul fasted. That is a short list of some of the people in the Bible who are recorded as people who practiced fasting as a part of their spiritual rhythms. So it's not as if fasting is this new or kind of novel thing. The people of God have been using this rhythm to set their lives apart for thousands of years. And here in 2022, fasting should still be something that takes place in our lives. Fasting should still be one of the rhythms that marks the way, the pace with which we live. The instruction that we have around fasting comes in Matthew chapter 6 during something called the Sermon on the Mount. This is one of Jesus' most epic teachings, and it stretches from Matthew 5 all the way through chapter 7. You should definitely read it if you're interested. This is actually one of the more explicit areas in our Bible where we see Jesus saying, hey, if you claim to be a follower of me and you want to know how to live your life, this is the way, right? Matthew chapter 5 through Matthew chapter 7, take a look at it. But what we're going to draw out today comes in chapter 6, verses 16 to 18, and it's just specific instructions about how to go about practicing this rhythm of fasting. It reads like this. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So the instructions about this spiritual rhythm, they don't tell us how long to fast or what to fast from, though in Jesus' day it was mostly food. People would say no to food for a season. We're going to talk about why they do that here in just a second. But this underscores that fasting is about reestablishing really this idea of the internal rhythm that guides our life, right? So the instruction we get is about kind of where is your heart in all of this? That's what Jesus is getting at in these verses. We just wrapped up this series all about community, all about relationships in the church and being connected to other people. There's obvious value in that, but what we're going to look at over the next 4 weeks are some rhythms that you should be committed to practicing personally because they're meant to be, yes, maybe practiced in the community, maybe on your own, but meant to mostly be things that would influence your own personal walk with Jesus. And that's what Jesus gets at in these verses. He says, hey, it's about you and God. You and God. Not about everybody else, but about you and God. You know, Jesus talks about this reward that comes with fasting. He says, when you fast, don't do it for everyone else to see. Don't see it for everybody else to celebrate. When you fast, don't make a big scene. That's that bit about the oil and the face, right? When you go lengths of time without eating, your body lacks some of the vitamins necessary to like keep your hair smooth and wavy, right? Or your face might get dirty. In fact, in Jesus' day, people would just make their face dirty so they'd look a little bit worn out. And people would be like, hey, are you fasting? They'd be like, oh yeah, I'm fasting. And they wanted the recognition of everybody else around them, the praise of those people. And so Jesus says, hey, when you fast, this is between you and the Lord, right? It's about enriching your walk with Jesus. So take care of yourself, right? Don't make yourself look all worn out and decrepit. Make yourself look healthy so that nobody else has to know. We're not in this for their celebration. We're in this for something else. So, when we say no to these things, when we say no to some things that are good, Jesus says it's not about getting love from people around you. It's about saying yes to the God who loves you. It's not about their love out there. It's about his love. Experiencing his love more personally, more fully, and more deeply. When we say no to things around us that we find life in, it can remind us of the true source of life. It's the God who's given it to us. You know, food, right? It's an obvious necessity, right? We have to have food to survive. In fact, my wife and I watch a show every once in a while, a survival show where people have to go like days without eating and you watch how it kind of eats away at them, right? Food is a necessity. But when we fast from food, what we're saying is, Jesus, I need you more than I need food. When my stomach growls, we can be reminded of that, you know what, God, you provide for me. You provide for all of the needs that I have. When we want steak or salad or a Crunchwrap Supreme, we can say, Jesus, I want you more. So what's the reward? At the end of that, Jesus says, hey, don't do it for everybody else out there. You do it for your Father who's unseen, who sees what you do in secret, and he will give you reward. What is it? The reward that comes when we fast is a deeper sense of God's presence in our lives and a greater sense of satisfaction in him. We are reminded of our need for God and find all that we long for in what he provides. Another pastor that I've read kind of talking about fasting, he says, what we hunger for most is what we worship, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it. Because when we fast, we can be reminded that more than food, we hunger for Christ. We want to worship him. We don't want to worship our plate and the food that's on it. We want to worship the God who gave us that plate, who gave us that food, who gives us all good things. And fasting reminds us that our dependence is on him and nothing that this world offers us. Today actually begins a season in the church calendar called Lent. This is a stretch of 40 days that's going to lead us up to Easter. It's a season that has been used by Christ followers, for hundreds and hundreds of years to kind of prepare them for Easter. And it's a season that has been continually kind of combined with the idea of fasting. Fasting and prayer to remind us that we need Jesus. So for 40 days, the reason why it's 40 days is because if you look at Matthew chapter 4, I believe it is, before Jesus' ministry starts, he goes out into the wilderness and he fasts for 40 days. And so we take these 40 days to kind of follow the example of Jesus, to fast and to pray in anticipation for Easter. When we get around and we celebrate that Jesus is the resurrected King of our lives and of the world. And so what I would love to invite you to do is, it's not a coincidence we're doing this series starting on today, with today starting Lent. I want to encourage you to commit to saying no to something for the next 40 days. Take this as a time to say no to something, to say yes to Jesus, to deepening your love for him, your commitment to him, your dependence on him. Maybe to establish or to reestablish a rhythm that brings peace to your life. Commit to saying no to something good. This is not take the next 40 days to say no to some sinful activity. My hope is that we are regularly saying no to sin. This is a time for us to say no to something that we might look at as good. Maybe it is food. Maybe it's I'm going to say no to a meal for a day. I might say no to a hobby for the next 40 days. Maybe I'm going to say no to social media or to music or to my phone as a whole. I'm going to detach from this thing to remind myself that my dependence is on God, that I need Jesus more than I need whatever this thing is, whatever it offers me. We're going to be talking through some other rhythms over the next few weeks that I might encourage you to add along to the rhythm of fasting for the next 40 days as we experience the sense of hopefully increased dependence on Jesus. But as you make this commitment, I'd encourage you to join it with a prayer that sounds kind of like this. God, during these 40 days, help me to hear from you. Help me to be aware of your presence in my life. Help me to fall more in love with you so that my life is a form of worship to you. Let that be your prayer over the next 40 days as you say no to good things for the sake of something great, a deeper love for and dependence on Jesus. Fasting is about understanding your need for God, resting in his love for you, and letting the beauty of the spiritual rhythm guide your life in Christ. This is the way.